It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome into the Redbird Reboot podcast, talking about a 1-2 Arizona Cardinals team after a 20-13 loss. Is the co-host Marcos Labrada, a.k.a. Pancake Soul. Marcos, this is a game that the Cardinals played that we thought that they had a decent chance of winning. They do end up seeing a similar result to the Buffalo game. They are only down one score. They end up essentially with a chance at the end of the game. The defense this time ends up giving up enough first downs, or they're not able to get a final shot off. And Arizona falls to 1-2 on the season. Before we get into all of that tonight, how are you doing, sir? And how are you feeling about this Cardinals team that, you talk about moral victories. They've had probably, if moral victories are victories, they'd be 3-0 right now. They're not. They're 1-2. How do you feel now heading into a game against a Commanders team that looked pretty good on Monday Night Football?
Well, as we know, this was the game that was going to be circled, highlighted for a lot of Cardinals fans. A lot of people were hoping we were going to be at the very least 1-2 going into this game because they're thinking it's going to be a slam dunk that we were going to beat the Commanders. I mean, in a sense, rightfully so, because you're thinking about a new coaching staff. You're thinking about a new offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator that's going to be under the head coach, which obviously we know Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator with the Cowboys, but he wasn't going to be calling the defense. He brings over his own guys, his own philosophy. Same thing as Gannon. Gannon calls the defense for the Eagles, comes over with us, and brings Nick Wallace to call essentially what his defense is. So that's what we were anticipating, that on this matchup that we were going to be probably breaking even. And if, let's just say, we were 2-1, people were going to feel good about going into this matchup. But of course, there's that Monday night game. There's the offense being that it's hasn't punted, I believe, in 2 games now. They've scored on every drive, albeit not all touchdowns. A lot of them were field goals in last week's game, and this past Monday they did light it up against a bad defense, though. So that's the key thing that is focused on right now. That's the one thing they should give us hope as a Cardinals fans, that the defense for the Commanders is just it's brutal. It's just bad.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those. It's very interesting as far as the upcoming matchup. There's a lot coming home. Speaking at least, though, of coming home, this is for a lot of Arizona Cardinals fans. Just some of the comments that were made by Jared Goff after the game, I think, are good to talk about. He said it was like a home game for the Lions. They said they hadn't seen something like that before. I know there's Cardinals fans who can sometimes be upset people can sell your tickets. I think in the other case, it's also recognizing, my family is originally from Michigan. We're the only people who are rooting for the Cardinals this week. Everyone else was a Lions fan. A lot of people moved from the Midwest into Arizona. So I don't think it's necessarily a surprise. I think it's part of with Arizona having to kind of build some of these traditions. And to be honest, if the season plays out like how we think it is, Detroit was in the NFC Championship game last season. They seem like they at least have the potential to be there this season as well, with just the amount of talent they have, that coaching staff. They also were able to, when they needed it most, pull enough out of the bag through the run game, through the passing game, to lean on to basically win a defensive battle that we weren't quite sure would be quite as much of a slobber knocker as it was. Cardinals were down by 10 points at the end of the first half. Very low scoring game. Only 3 points were scored in the second half. That's one of the lowest outputs I think that we've actually seen from the Cardinals with Kyler Murray. The last time I remember was against the Bears offense, which, as you can remember, was that run stuffing team, number 1 ranked run defense in the NFL when they played in Chicago in the freezing cold last year. Arizona did not run the ball exceptionally well here against the Lions, Marcos. That's probably what stands out, is that Kyler Murray was the leading rusher. Sometimes that can be handy. Other times you want to see James Conner get the football. It seemed like after a while they threw the ball to have to try to catch up. The Cardinals played a lot of passing game where the Lions played in man. It was very physical for a lot of times. There was times that there were flags, times that there were not. There were controversial flags that happened, at least at the end of a half, or I should say a controversial 2-minute warning whistle. But let's go ahead and kind of break down on the first drive overall with Arizona. They did relatively well because they were able to get down the field. They drove down and were able to get the ball into the end zone. And it was one of those Marvin Harrison Jr. touchdowns that when we've talked about seeing a number one receiver, how you're able to step up in that spot. I think it was even less that we got to see him make some of those plays, but everyone got involved in that drive, Marcos. You had a pass to Trey McBride for 7 yards. You had Michael Wilson was involved. You had Marvin Harrison Jr. on the back shoulder fade, which we've finally gotten to see some of that work out over the last few weeks. We got to see Kyler run around a lot on that first play for the most part. And then, of course, you had the Marvin Harrison Jr. throw for a touchdown. No one's really talking about the speed this week, Marcos. When you look at the play, you're able to see that Cardinals are basically set up where you've got one guy in the backfield, 11 personnel. You've got one tight end, Trey McBride, on the side for the most part. Greg Dortch lines up next to him. And you can tell that with all of that commotion, with the tight ends, with the two running backs in the backfield, that Marvin's got one-on-one coverage down below. They've actually shied to safety slightly over him and give Michael Wilson the spot up top. They fake that handoff to Greg Dortch. Kyler ends up looking back. Marvin, actually, they run a crossing pattern all the way across the field, something we talked a lot about with Cliff Kingsbury's offenses. They would run short mesh concepts close. They wouldn't run those sort of crossing routes far. And I think some of it was because Cliff would really not have as much time because they wouldn't put a tight end back there. They wouldn't do the heavy play action fake. What we at least get to see here is Kyler being able to line up, and he goes out of the shotgun. So it just shows not everything has to be under center. But in using some of the personnel, they bring Greg Dortch in, kind of show some man coverage, move him back out. And then when that crossing route happens, Marv just outruns the other guys to the side of the end zone. Kyler's in a bit of a moving pocket. He just throws up a nice, beautiful ball that's caught by Marvin and goes for a nice touchdown. What's funny, Marcos, is that when you look at this play also, this was just one play after we saw Kyler Murray essentially had a short pass to Marvin Harrison on the other side of the field. That one ends up being, and people said it was off of his hands. I think it was a little bit more of Kyler threw the ball, little high, little hard. Obviously, with Marvin, you're supposed to make a play on the ball if you can get two hands on it like he did. It was just one of those unique spots where you felt like that, it's a misconnection. We'll see if it comes back to haunt them. Very next play just goes right back to that well and is able to capitalize. For those of you watching on our live stream or on our YouTube channel, you can at least see here in that play, Marvin, when he goes through, is actually he's has the ball hit off of basically both hands. Should have been a touchdown. What did you think, at least, of Arizona coming out for the most part? We thought that 7-7, Detroit just running the ball up the middle, Cardinals driving down the field with this balanced attack. We thought this was going to be a team that was putting up points on the board. They only put up 13, of course.
I think I love this split back look, by the way, with Kyler Murray. He's ran a couple of these double crossing concepts. Not so much. They called this in the end zone because they knew that they could get a natural rub. I think I posted this on my Twitter account too, on my X account, breaking this down. But so they motioned Greg Dortch all the way to do the split back formation set from shotgun. Obviously, once he calls for the ball and whatnot, they run those double crossers. Look at who they're following. They're both the safety picks up on Marvin Harrison Jr. because they know he's the more dangerous target. It didn't matter because that little crosser right there caused that natural rub, which made him respond late. Not only that, he had to evade trying to run into Michael Wilson and the other defender. There, you get that little bit of step by Marvin Harrison Jr. And I mean, he gives the ball a nice touch. Like Kyler Murray doesn't try to laser this in. He just throws it so that it kind of floats up in the air, gives this guy a chance to be able to not only acclimate to like the pass or like adjust to the pass, but that it's important that you do that because you want them to have their feet set. You don't want them leaving their feet at the back of the end zone. That's how you
he
get out
comes back
bounds.
to the ball. Comes back to the ball a little bit at the end as well, which is something you want to see as far as rookie development. There's a time or two where Marv just seemed like he didn't come back enough. When you're able to kind of come back a little bit to the quarterback versus continuing on your route or fading away, the defensive back can kind of get a hand in and swat. If you move toward, then there's just an angle that you're going to have there that is going to be easier, and it's also going to get you to the ball faster. So you can see when the ball gets thrown up in the air, Marvin, the first time he kind of just turns around to be able to get the ball, puts up both hands, but he really doesn't make kind of that extra effort of being able to get that oomph. The second time around, he doesn't make that same mistake twice. He actually then goes and is able to get the ball by changing his route angle just a little bit. Yeah, well, you can see he also starts about like here at the R. Kyler's throwing him where it is open. He drifts a little bit up, and then that last step, he comes back just to make sure that he's able to get that ball in. It was a good touchdown. Unfortunately, Marcos, the Cardinals really only got that touchdown on the day, which was a little bit of a surprise, I think, to us.
Yeah, I thought we were going to be on a roll because, I mean, seeing this from the first drive, I don't know how you felt, but I felt like, oh, wow, they're just going to continue what they did with the Los Angeles Rams, because that's how you feel. You feel that, like, momentum. Like, everybody thought Kyler Murray is the MVP candidate, or at least a front runner after last week's game, beating down on a Los Angeles Rams team who just beat the 49ers, this past weekend. We all thought going into this game after that first drive, like, they still got it. Like, I mean, this was not a fluke. And unfortunately, it just from there on out, like they just couldn't recreate what they had.
Yeah, Cardinals, they had as far as for rushing went with their team, it's not the best day for the offensive line. They did look like they were beat quite a bit. One of the things I think that we noticed when it came to just the rushing that they had done, they really did not get a good enough push where not only did they not get any dynamic plays outside of Kyler's legs, but really they had a lot of their runs, at least for the most part, were stuffed. They didn't really seem like they had that much that got freed in. I think that when you're looking at some of the different plays that are there, one of the biggest things that we saw with the Cardinals was there were 5 times that they ran inside the tackles. There was 13 times that they ran outside the tackles, and a lot of those runs actually were Kyler Murray being able to run around the outside. There's a couple plays Trey Benson came in for. But as far as the yardage for that one, James Conner ended up with he didn't even end up leading. Yeah, he didn't lead the team in rushing. That was Kyler. I said that. He only had 9 carries for 17 yards. So that's literally 1.9 yards a carry. Even when Trey Benson came in, he had a little run play for 6 yards. Amari DiMercato for 7. That was basically the longest rushing yard of the day that a running back had. So this was a Lions defensive front that had the run game down, that had the different fits. And Arizona, to their credit, recognized, hey, like, we're a rushing offense. When they're stopping rushing, we have to adjust and have to adapt. We need to be able to become a passing offense. And they were able to throw the ball. What ended up being the difference was that they threw the ball, I think, so much. I mean, they didn't have it where it was unreasonable. Like, Kyler threw it 34 times. It's a little bit different than like your typical, 40, 45 times that you'd see with Cliff Kingsbury. But there was a lot of incompletions and a lot of plays that were left on the field, Marcos. One of the biggest plays that I think was left on the field for Arizona was when they had the deep pass that was basically intended for Marvin Harrison Jr. that was intercepted. That was one of those plays that when you're talking about like the deep passing game for Arizona, this is like, 20 plus yards in the air. They had only 1 out of those 7 was complete. So that's a huge far cry last week. First week, we're like, oh, yeah, look, they didn't complete that much. Let's see how the deep passing game goes. Week 2, complete a bunch of deep passes. Week 3, it's kind of a little bit back here. And I think that's something that they'll have to work and figure out as far as the Cardinals coaching staff is concerned, because it's a combination of protections and also a combination of concepts that can lead to some of those things. So good example, at least for one of the first plays that we saw, which is that deep pass to Marvin Harrison Jr., a little bit mixed up with some hands at the end, but it's one of those throws. It's honestly pretty good from Kyler Murray. It's a little bit on the inside there of the safety, just a regular drop back. He's going to take a hit as a result of that from Aiden Hutchinson. Still gets it to the receiver. You can even see when you're looking at the play that that Kyler should have probably been credited with catching that spot for the most part too. It just was not meant to be, at least for the Cardinals' deep passing game today. The other play that ended up being, of course, as we all remember and recognize, is that deep passing play to Marvin Harrison Jr. They're coming out of the half. They are already within essentially edge of Matt Prater's field goal range. They do a nice deep play fake. Kyler sets up. There's a nice pocket. The Lions end up only rushing 4. It's just nice too, because it looks like it's going to be running a duo play out of that, where you got the 2 guys blocking each of the men. You're pushing the tackles up. You've got your running back after the fake is in pass protection. And then you also have a screen pass available just in case Kyler, for some reason, needs to get out of it. He's got 2 other options. The phrasing he used after the game was greedy. He said he got greedy. He thought they were going to score on that drive. He saw that Marv had what looked like to be a shot that was there, so he decided to throw him deep. He ends up actually underthrowing the ball a little bit. Kirby Joseph stays with it and picks him off. I don't know if that's that he baited him into that throw, but it's one of those places, if you're a quarterback and you're looking at how the play is designed or developed, you can say that, yeah, there's a good chance to give him a 50-50 ball to come down it, but that's not going to be a 50-50 ball. When the defense has got 2 guys in double coverage, if it's single coverage, Marv can take 50-50 balls, make them 70-30. You get 2 guys in coverage, that's going to push it to maybe a 40-60 sort of a ball, especially when Michael Wilson on that route goes wide open, just runs right behind the zone coverage that the linebackers are playing, their eyes as far as for when you look at how they react to this play. It's really fun because you get to kind of see how the offense works and see decision-making. They're caught out of sorts, at least on that play for the most part. Now, some people think Kyler, did he have a thought that it was going to be a false start? Because they're up with the ball, they're under center, they're ready to go. It seems like that they weren't set. So you have instead, though, is you've got a route that's coming open. That's what the route's designed for, essentially, is that you've got the play action fake, you've got the players designed here who are going to be watching kind of the underneath route. It also looks like one of those guys is watching the quarterback's eyes as well. So you probably have someone who's playing as a spy on Kyler Murray, which we've seen the Detroit Lions do. They did it all the way back in 2019. Instead of taking that chunk yardage play to Michael Wilson getting a first down, he just ends up throwing it to the Lions. And Detroit ends up at least going down with that and doesn't get any points, but it really ends up being a disservice to Arizona. Because it did feel like there was 2 game-changing momentum plays in the game. That was one of them. And then the other one was, of course, the false start or 2-minute warning. That was actually a 2-minute warning, even though it should have been a 2.01 minute warning that happened at the end of the half.
Yeah, that I don't have an issue. I know a lot of people have been talking about that last interception that was thrown and whatnot. I don't have an issue with the decision on that one. I know they constantly mention, and it's a couple of people that we have in our community that mentioned that you had Michael Wilson on the front side or the play side dig. They came wide open in the intermediate middle. But if he had changed the trajectory of that throw, it felt like he was moonballing it kind of. When I saw him release that on during the game, I thought to myself, well, he's probably moonballing it because Marvin has a step on his corner and he probably has him stacked, which means he just wants to drop it in the bucket. But when I seen the 2 defenders underneath, the quarter safety coming in to basically box out Marvin Harrison Jr. Now we're supposed to be seeing Marvin possibly come down with those when it comes to being taller, more physically gifted, but he was way out of position for that, and it was a bad throw by Kyler Murray. But I don't knock the decision at all. I think like I said, I think if Kyler Murray had given it a little bit he would have thrown it a little bit lower and more of a frozen rope to Marvin Harrison Jr., he probably gets that touchdown. And we're talking about a different game after that. We're talking about a game that's not only closer, but the confidence is there. Because I think after that interception happened, I saw a lot of the confidence in this offense. And I think Kyler Murray was holding back on a few throws. Don't get me wrong, he was still pushing the ball down the field. And I 100% like that. I want him to push the ball down the field. But it seems like his confidence kind of waned. And he even said in the press conference, I I was going in, he hadn't thrown an interception all season. And, he mentioned that one really stung. And I'm like, yeah, don't focus on the fact that it was something that you were trying to keep perfect. Just learn from it, because I don't knock the decision. I do knock the type of throw. So maybe next time, if they run that same concept, you'll see a different type of trajectory for the ball. And, I honestly thought he was going to, when he let go of that ball, once again, I was, it's going to be a touchdown. And unfortunately, it wasn't anywhere near it.
Nope. Yeah. The biggest thing, at least with all of that is like, there's throws at least that are quick snap judgment calls. There's other times just throws that can be short. Also, it can be that there's a good player who's making a play. That's one of the biggest things that I think at least we forget about is Kirby Joseph is one of those like safeties. He did a good job, stayed on the inside hip, was able to kind of undercut that route and be able to get the interception, which is kind of then like a punt into the end zone. The unfortunate nature, at least, is with that play, when you're looking at least at how the rest of the season turned out, Arizona at that point, that was like the best starting field position they had. After that, Detroit was able to keep consistently running the ball and punting to put the Cardinals back into a deep range. And with Arizona seemingly one-dimensional, that led to a lot of having to get closer pass plays, trying to not get back into third and long to be able to then take some of those sacks. There were some that did go back and forth between each of them. The biggest, obviously, other play that mattered in the game, as fans know, was this one in which everyone was like, yeah, Arizona pretty much got jobbed by this. You can see here it's 3rd and 12. The actual All-22 film does not have this play because technically even the first play that happened before this, it was a 3rd and 7 false start penalty, at least that happened. So now it's 3rd and 12. And with the amount of time that you can see left there on the clock, it's at 2:03, 2:02. And you can very clearly see at least that at 2:01. Now, if you're going to like go to the 2-minute warning, you just hold on to the ball, try to get them to jump off sides at least. Maybe like, it's 3rd and 12. Like if they jump out sides, you get a little bit of that penalty back. Instead, what ends up happening is that the 2-minute warning is there. They play it all for everything. You end up with, I believe it's Owen Papo ends up being able to blitz through. And the ball gets hit by I believe this is the actually it's safety blitz, which is coming from,
I think it's Jalen Thompson.
Mm-hmm, yep. So kind of what that Budda Baker thing would be. So they overload it. Goff goes back. And Marcos, remember the film study we did a week ago? We said, hey, like when Jared Goff's under pressure, like he's going to end up throwing it. So he throws the ball, gets batted in. Mac Wilson gets there. When you look at least at the exact timing, of course, it was basically snapped at 2:01. It's a judgment call by the referees. And what ended up happening is not that it cost Arizona the game necessarily. There's other plays that they made, but it basically ended up being one of the worst outcomes you can have, because when they came back in after that non-penalty, Jahmyr Gibbs was able to take off at least, and he got, I think it was all of that yardage back. So he went and got 14 yards on 3rd and 12, which that's one of those things that really like can't happen, unfortunately. You need to be able to have, I think it was, let me double check and see the number here. Yeah, so at least it was first and, I think it was at the 1st and 10, they called the 2-minute warning. They end up picking up that first down by being able to just run the ball. And, oh, sorry, I've got the, for those of you who are watching on our
You're looking
live
for the
stream here. Yeah, I'm looking at least to make sure that you can show for just how in that spot, this is where you have at least with the Lions. You've got essentially 3rd and 12. You're looking for a pass play. Everyone's thinking it's going to be a pass play. They probably could also do a give-up play here where essentially you hand the ball off to the running back. You can see here that they end up doing a good job of getting off of their blocks, getting guys downfield. You've got 4 Cardinals who are coming there to Gibbs, but he follows his inside block very well. This is just one of those areas where like Detroit executes super well. And you can see how Budda ends up as far as being one of the last guys who's in there. Budda goes and kind of shades outside to make sure if they're going to try to do some sort of a deep throw. He comes up at least, misses the tackle coming right up the middle, I think it is. And that's where you just really wish it would have been nice. He just kind of a little bit of a gamble. Gibbs does a good job of being able to make sure he can avoid it. But Budda comes down. He's the guy who's right there. And he gets just enough, at least outside of the one player, and Hutchinson gets just enough, at least, of the linebacker, or not Hutchinson, sorry, the tight end, I think it's Laporta, actually, gets just enough there, so that way when Papo's trying to get down there, he's able to go and pick it up. Just good execution. You would love to see Arizona be able to hopefully see someone like a Darius Robinson come back, filling in that role. And when you've got one of those double blocks that you'll have here, being able to have a guy who can get off of some of those double blocks and that way being able to shed, you can see here he's able to finally shed, but it's at that point Gibbs is already past him. It's just one of those places, at least, where that play, of course, ends up getting followed by another play later in the drive, which, went and kind of made the ESPN top 10 because there was a hook and ladder play that the Lions ran to perfection on Arizona with a short pass to Amon-Ra St. Brown. He ends up just kind of flipping it right back over to Jahmyr Gibbs. It's just one of those plays that's like, essentially, it's almost unstoppable because the risk is so highly involved that the things that can go wrong are so huge. So this is a play that Dan Campbell had said they were actually lining up with this in the week before when they were going up, at least, and playing. They said they were trying to get it done with the Rams the week before.
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think.
And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They tried to get in a spot to run it, and I believe that was when they actually had the ball turned over, I believe. But this is the play that they were trying to run. You can at least see here, it looks like your typical pass play for the most part. This is just angles his route back in. You got Sam Laporta trying to take the deep coverage of the safety. The two other guys who are in the middle of the field for Cardinals playing linebackers.
They're in dagger.
They're in zone. It looks like it's a quick dagger, pick up a few yards. Instead, they just toss it to the running back, which if something goes wrong and you're laddering it back, it's a little bit off timing. He fumbles it, like that could immediately go back to the other team while you're in field goal range. Instead, he catches it and they play it perfectly. They've got a good block downfield, at least with Laporta. And it looks like also, as far as the injury is concerned for Laporta, he had an ankle issue, they said, after the game. This is where he was blocking in on, I believe it was, this is Jalen Thompson downfield. So you got a tight end on a safety. This is where that second ankle injury happened, at least while Buda was coming in. He dives, ends up falling into Laporta's ankle. It does go for a great-looking touchdown, though, and it's something I think that the NFL in the future, if it is going to truly morph into a different sort of league, having a little bit more of, instead of just the typical end arounds or Statue of Liberty plays, a little bit more of these sort of kind of more dynamic plays in motion where you're running a typical play, then suddenly you have a little trickery that comes out of it. That's something that the Lions, as a Dan Campbell, have really pulled a lot out of their bag of tricks. Ben Johnson is one of those solid play callers who probably gets a head coaching job if he wants one after this season. Just calls it in the perfect place and perfect time that puts the Lions up, and the Cardinals would score one more field goal, but that would be it essentially for as far as for the score of the game. Yeah,
I think the linebacker play was horrible on that when it came to that run play that they pulled up. And by the way, for people who are knocking Drew Petzing for what he called against the Bills, the reason why he called something like that is because they were looking at a too high, like you were going up against too high if you're the Lions, and they went ahead and just decided, you know what, we're going to run the ball. We're going to see if we can pick up this yardage because there's only 6 defenders in the box. So once the guard got to the second level, the problem was that like he ran straight. Like I get sometimes the linebackers can't do anything as far as like pursuit angles when it comes to somebody coming to the second level to come and block you. But you're supposed to be a force defender trying to force it back to the inside, and instead he runs straight into the defense to the guard and doesn't shed that block in time. So I think that could have been a tackle had it been executed right, but instead he stays on his block. Buda Baker has to come through the outside, which, by the way, if he's trying to angle it from the outside, the running back's just going to go to the inside, and that's how he got that pickup of 13 yards, which led to them driving down and getting the hook and ladder on that great like like offensive like scheme, not scheme, but like that play design was really good, and they pulled it off in the right down and distance. And I was wondering, like when I first saw it, I was like, what was the name of that type of play? I've heard of this play before, because the ladder part is obviously the lateral, but I thought to myself, like, what is like hook and ladder? I was like, oh that's what it's called.
Yeah, exactly. That's the hook and ladder. And I think that was one of those areas where the Lions it wasn't a pretty game. There were guys who got injured quite a bit. There's actually a couple of plays of where there was some physical play where Paris is just kind of doing a typical chop that goes down, and you end up having Marcus Davenport, who the Lions signed, who's been playing pretty well, at least as far as for rushing across from Aiden Hutchinson. Cardinals did a good job of not letting Hutchinson dominate the game, I thought. I think that there was late times where Kyler had to make moves with his legs, and there was eventually a sack he did get. Part of that was at that point with the Cardinals throwing every down and down to their fourth string offensive tackle because Kelvin Beachum was out, in fact, on that Sunday. They're able to put another player in. It's the third stringer. And, of course, he ends up getting hurt because this is kind of how the Cardinals' luck has been. Fortunately, Beachum was back at practice today. We'll see if that means that he will be able to play. But, yeah, it just was it was one of those places where it felt like that the Cardinals had a lot of times where they were close. It was Jackson Barton was his name. I was trying to make sure I remembered. There was a lot of times they were close, but just were not able to come down with like the big play or were not able to get it. There was a few times that they did, however, come up with a big play. So one of the plays I wanted to at least highlight was one that we talked about the week before, Marcos, which is when Jared Goff is under pressure, there's pressure coming up the middle. There's a little bit of a disguised look that the Cardinals, he said, could bring when it came to being able to run. Let me make sure I can get this one set here.
There we go. Set.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's doing that stupid.
Yeah, it's got a little bit there. But you can at least see that this is the one play where under pressure, we've said with Jared Goff, one of the biggest things that he can do is when he is going to have either pressure at the middle or has to get rid of the play, that there's times where he can just have a predetermined throw over the middle. So if you're reading the quarterback's eyes and you drop back into coverage, that can end up being a big momentum changer because as we saw with the Dennis Gardeck, he's lined up on the outside looking like he's going to be passing. He kind of even points it out to be like, hey, look, like you got the guy at least who's going to be up top here. He's supposed to be kind of, they said, rushing the passer on this play is what they would say normally, but he's actually reading the quarterback, at least on those eyes. And they said this is where he just has to drop back because that's his responsibility. They're playing a zone coverage. This is essentially going to be overloading one side of the field to be able to see if you can get to the quarterback. Now, there's a numbers game here where the Lions, you can see, are looking on that side. The Cardinals actually get a numbers advantage on the outside. So that means he has to come back and read these players across the middle. He does not realize that Gardeck, who normally always rushes from that side, is actually dropped back into coverage. This would normally be like how Zaven Collins got his interception. He just steps right in front and picks the ball off. Just dives over there for that one, does his little celebration. And Cardinals have a game wrecker in Dennis Gardeck for the second week in as many weeks.
This is a creeper blitz. I love this design. This is something that Tennessee made famous. The reason why I know this is a creeper blitz is because it's not an actual blitz because you only have 4 defenders coming through. But they call it a creeper blitz because you're bringing somebody from the second level, which is the linebacker, as you can see. And, of course, Dennis Gardeck. Every single time you do that, you drop a defensive end, outside linebacker into a flat zone coverage or into whatever coverage that you have fitting them in, which is like this is a creeper blitz on a cover 3 look. So you have your one high safety, you have your 2 corners, like using man turns. That it's a zone like technique and whatnot. So they're man turning, facing the quarterback, looking like like kind of sidestepping up to their deep third and whatnot, or if they even get there, you know what I mean. But Dennis Gardeck dropped into that. It's basically the hook curl area. He was right there reading the quarterback's eyes, and as you can see, as soon as he releases it, he knows where it's going.
And he's protected in this area, which is, I think, part of it too. Is like you said, this was a mental thing that we saw. You didn't even have Goff under pressure here. He just throws it essentially into, like you said, that was almost like a predetermined quick few yards to get back. There isn't really any pressure here as far as for the pocket. He just throws at least to where the player is, just doesn't see him. And Gardeck makes him pay. The unfortunate nature, at least, of the plays that when the Cardinals did get this turnover in the game, I believe that it actually did only result in a field goal, unless I am mistaken looking at the looking at the stats. But yeah, this is kind of my reaction during the game, Marcos, when we were like, oh, that was it. I was pointing. I was like,
awesome.
There it is. There's Goff at least. They dropped back into coverage. You threw that predetermined pass over the middle of the field. They had someone waiting for it. It's like you could tell that the Cardinals have been watching their tape because those are the 2 picks that he threw previously in the Tampa Bay game. There was one that he threw over the middle. Over the middle, right. There's one he threw to the outside, I know, as well. But it was over the middle was the place where that's where throwing over the middle, if you're late or like in that play, you don't see someone, you got to be able to read the underneath coverage. Arizona did a good job in that look of disguising it, having the look come where it wasn't even under pressure, and Arizona was able to make a good play of it. I thought, Marcos, that the biggest thing for this Cardinals team was that there's still some questions that I think that we have. So, like, we haven't seen a truly developed, balanced attack from the Arizona Cardinals yet. For week 1, they were running the football, and then they were forced to pass the football, had a hard time passing it. Week 2, everyone's like, we're not going to let Arizona run the football. Marvin Harrison Jr. goes wild in the first quarter on just some of these plays that Arizona has in the passing game where the Rams are just trying to make sure they can sell it against the run. In this game, we see some big pass plays for a little bit, but then after that, the Cardinals really struggled to run the ball well, and then there was everything from drops to missed plays to like that deep interception. It really was a war of attrition that eventually ended up with the Lions being able to force Arizona into I believe it was a 3. It wasn't a 3 and out, but they drove down the field and ended up going for it on that 4th and 7 play. That ended up resulting in a turnover on downs. Lions took over and made enough first downs happen to put the game away. I think that what we're going to look for in some cases, and this is something that Seth Cox from Revenge of the Birds said, was there was a lot of man defense that was being played by the Lions, and a lot of what Arizona was running in those games was essentially a lot of the, maybe not necessarily dynamic, but a lot of the route concepts that really did not make single safety coverage pace. This is a good example. And like even the first drive, you can see Kyler drops back. This is just a quick pass down at the bottom to Michael Wilson. You can see how the Lions are swarming to the ball for the most part. This is a lot of where some of their passing game had room in places to operate underneath. Then when they were kind of dropping back and able to take some of this away, and I think some of that impacted it too, was Kyler had to get the ball out quick because it did feel like their right tackle situation. They were recognizing, like, they got to know where Aiden Hutchinson, where 97 is at all times. It did kind of feel like there was a little bit more that I wish that they would have done in terms of some of that design when they're trying to come back in the second half. It did really feel also, though, like when you can't run the ball and then you're only throwing it, it does really kind of turn you into a team where teams are able to drop back. It did feel like Arizona could have taken a few more of those little small plays, but they ran out of time to get back some of those chunk yardages. And Marcos, I feel like that next week against the Commanders is probably one of the best passing matchups that the Cardinals are going to get all year. It's also a very good rushing offense. If you're the Cardinals, how do you go about at least learning from some of what we've been able to see, at least with Arizona this season? Is on our screen, we're watching at least a kind of Kyler Murray play, which kind of backs up some of the passing concept questions that I've talked about, which is when you're taking a look at the downfield play of that 16-yard pass to Marvin Harrison Jr., that's more of a coverage issue than anything else. You're looking at least at Marvin getting all the way over from one side of the field to the other. You get James Conner at least moves in the backfield. They kind of fake it a little bit. Kyler steps up in the pocket. You've got to throw over the middle of the field, and he just ends up basically saying, I'm not going to take that. He ends up scrambling down. Maybe there's a visual thing that pops up here. Marvin ends up kind of working his way back around. This is just where there's too much time in the pocket. There's a lot of times where we would see coverage, and there'd be tight man coverage that was being played. And it really just felt like there wasn't as many guys getting wide open as you would have liked to have seen. That was actually backed up at least by some data this week, Marcos. But before I at least show the chart, I wanted you to kind of check in and see if that was something that you felt like with where the receivers are, and especially with James Conner at 1.9 yards per carry. Should Cardinals fans be kind of concerned that this is a defense that can play in there and hang in, but when it's time for the offense to have to go out there, that maybe it's just not the dominant team that we had hoped it would be?
I'm not sure if I would just panic 100%, especially with like what they're running, because they're actually like what they're doing is exactly what I want them to do as an offense. They're using a lot of motion. They're doing that to try to see if they can diagnose whether they're coming up against man coverage or zone coverage. So they're doing a good job as far as doing that. When Kyler Murray is keeping his eyes downfield, that's what I've been praising about him. Because a lot of times he would just tuck it and he just put his head down, and you'd see receivers down the field just have their hands up or throw the mailbox up like, hey, I'm open right here. And it would just be no reason to, because he was just going to run. So that's another thing that he was doing. I think this was just an unfortunate circumstance where they had the recipe to stop the run game. And I think once the run game died, this offense was going to have a harder time like being able to generate any type of offense by just having Kyler Murray sit like back in the shotgun, where you think he would be naturally like, know where to pick off his targets, throw where the open receivers at, try to read the entire field. But they wanted that. You could tell they just kind of wanted that. They wanted to do the classic, hey, we're going to swarm you. We're going to build like that kind of like that U-shaped wall to make sure that we take all this, put the hands up, block the vision over the middle. We're going to force you to throw the outside, or we're going to force you to run with it or scramble with it. And that's what they wanted. So the run game, there is some concern with the run game, but I think we've seen enough of a sample size with this team that they can run the ball effectively. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest area from what I saw was they had a lot of time that was spent to pass protection, and it seemed like with getting a new guy up to speed, like remember, they signed Barton up and promoted him off of the practice squad just pretty much at least as like during the week, because they went to the essentially like you're kind of at that point like having to pick and choose. People are saying, should DJ Humphries like try to sign with the team? Is he healthy enough if Kelvin can't come back? Because they have all of those injuries to the one position. With a play like this is part of where the Lions' philosophy is, and it's one thing where you kind of also credit like their ability and talent, because this is one of those typical spots where single high safety coverage, people are talking about two safeties, cover two, running quarters. A lot of what I think we've talked about, Marcos, is that there are ways to beat cover two. We saw week one Cardinals were basically running the ball and then checking down, doing all those short passes over the middle of the field. The Bills were able to adjust, and once you saw Von Miller being able to wreak havoc off of the edge, Arizona really just had to kind of make a few of those last gasp plays because their defense was not able to stop the run, or when they kind of had guys covered, Josh Allen was able to take off. The coverage that the Lions have had as far as man coverage goes, and this is something within Arizona scope, they played better when Terrion Arnold was on the field. He kind of was on and off throughout the day as far as his coverage went. But you can see here that they just mirror up and match up with these guys perfectly as far as where it goes with man coverage. Lions were doing plays like this all day where it felt like Arizona's receivers weren't getting open. To the point where Seth Cox of Revenge of the Birds said, like, is this one of those places where you look at the Cardinals, you look at the Lions, say, hey, if we could be a playoff team this year, we'll have to play a division winner. We think that could be the Lions. Do you throw something out there? Not to say, we're going to throw this out there that's going to be totally fake, but more throw something out there that you're going to say is, hey, here's what we're playing and running. But the second time around, we're going to have this in mind, kind of like being able to game plan. There's coaches who are obviously here to think about every sort of possibility. I think that was interesting thing to pass on. What is interesting here to pass on also is just how well some of the Lions coverage worked. So they're playing man coverage at the bottom of the screen for those of you watching. You're doing a little rub route. You've got one player who's going inside, one player who's essentially going out, trying to be able to go far enough to pull the eye off of his man. And you can see right here that he kind of is able to, doesn't quite get enough, at least in Michael Wilson, and he's able to kind of grab him pretty quickly, move him back. Actually, I think that's actually 84. I think it's Elijah Higgins, actually.
That's Higgins.
Yeah. And you can at least see they end up with Marvin at least lined up over down here. He's actually going to be running out of the slot. But they have a guy, this would be exactly what you would want. Now, Jonathan Gannon said after the game, they had guys who were able to essentially change their routes to a fade route if they got a coverage they like. So a good example of that would be, if you're talking about here, you got one safety in the middle of the field. You're able to look at how Cardinals have McBride stationed up here, and then you've got your other receiver up top over there, and I believe that's Wilson. Dortch splits up top, and Wilson essentially is like, hey, look, we got one safety over the middle of the field. You got him, you got Marvin. Let's see if we can push down the field and be able to get open. Lions end up rushing 5. They do a stunt. Stunt gets picked up, which is something that I know we've talked about before, Marcos, that the Cardinals ran a stunt last week against the Rams. Rams did not pick it up. You're at least able to see some of the veteran linemen who are able to be seeing that second guy who's blitzing, being able to pick it up, gives Tyler some time in the pocket. It just ends up being where that there's enough good coverage here that they're just physical. They're pushing. They're kind of getting down them. They finally, by the time that they get open, Kyler's reading the middle of the field because obviously he's going to be looking at these two players here. The safety, to his credit, when you're looking at the middle of the field, he's kind of shading a little bit toward Marvin to begin the play, then snaps back into his deep middle coverage. So at this spot, if I'm the quarterback, I'm like reading where everything is going. I'm probably going to be going and aiming to that left side as well. Once I read the right, look off the safety, come back to the left, try to pick up the yards. The coverage is just too good here. Like, I could probably try to check it at least to George, but as soon as he goes to throw, that's when that hand comes up. So Kyler does something to make a play out of nothing, scrambles, and is able to get at least a little bit of that penalty yardage back, including the first down. This is some of the progress. I think that when we've talked about, this is how you want to see Kyler Murray running the ball, Marcos. I think that there's a bit more design plays we'd like to be able to see as far as maybe a bit more zone read that they could throw in every once in a while. But I thought that this was at least a good example of the offense being able to say, hey, you're playing a good defense. It's playing man coverage across the board. How do you look? And the answer, I think, through this first couple of weeks, Marcos, is they've kind of looked a little bit inexperienced. And I'm curious how much of that's going to change as the season goes on and how much of that a lot of fans will want to know as the rest of the years go on. Because to this point, if you had asked before the season started, where were the Cardinals going to be after 3 weeks? I think we would have said, hey, possibility they're 0-3. Bet that they'll knock off one of those teams in a surprise. But when you open up against 3 playoff teams in the Bills, the Rams, the Lions, if you can win one of those, we thought it'd be a good case. If you can win 2 of them, oh, great. The Cardinals are angry at themselves because they thought we had a chance to be able to win all of those games. We had a chance at the end of the Buffalo game. We were only down by 6 points, could get a touchdown and win it. Lions game, they were down by 7. You could go for 2 at the end if you were able to drive down. I think that this is a team that is going toe-to-toe with some of the, honestly, toughest and biggest teams in the NFL. And while they did have some injuries that popped up for both teams, they at least were able to hold their own long enough to where they even won the second half, Marcos. They had a field goal in the second half and held the Lions out of the end zone. Now, granted, end of the game that happened there. So the Lions just basically took a knee after that catch to Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I think if I was a Cardinals fan and I feel like I'm discouraged, part of it is you've seen 2 home losses, 1 home win, 1 home loss. This is a team that's entertaining. And to me, a team that is bad is so difficult to watch, where there's problems, there's other issues. This is a team that you can tell is on the precipice. It just hasn't had that edge tip over quite yet. But the fact that they've been in or blowing away teams in each of their games, Marcos, far cry from where last year is. And so for me as a Cardinals fan, it's fun to watch this season. I don't think that that's an excuse to say, oh, they can keep getting moral victories, but it's better than at least looking at this team and still saying they've got miles to go before they're able to be competitive. I saw a competitive football team on Sunday in Arizona, and it wasn't just the Lions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really encouraged, obviously, by what the defense did in the second half. We didn't think this defense was going to be up to par with teams like the Lions, and obviously the Buffalo Bills was a different story. But there is a possibility, an alternate universe where we're 3-0 because everything was in reach. So I don't see this as a second year of the rebuild or whatnot. I see this as we can probably make the playoffs this year, and I'm not just saying that because I'm trying to be a homer. I'm saying that because of what we saw for the first 3 games. Albeit that we only have one of those wins and whatnot, every single game was winnable. Every single game had a little bit of something that we could have done better, that possibly could have turned the game, could have swung the game in our favor and stuff. Obviously, like I said, that official the official call about that, stopping it right before the 2-minute warning that ended up being incorrect. That changes everything if that play comes out to become what it is, So I'm encouraged by what I've seen so far. We have obviously we have a big matchup coming up this weekend, mostly because we have an ex-head coach coming in as an offensive coordinator, which I think suits him way better than the coach. And, we all know how that's going to play out.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be with Cliff Kingsbury. Dan Quinn is someone who the Cardinals have always seemingly done super well against. His defense in Dallas, even last year with the likes of Josh Dobbs, only a couple of weeks in, they were able to knock off a win, being able to run the football well. The thing I think we'll end on, at least, and this will be kind of some food for thought to look at, is so far as with the route concepts, I can kind of see what Arizona is doing in some cases, but we've noted now when there's teams in zone coverage or has someone like Tre'Davious White and Marvin Harrison Jr., they kind of had to move him around a little bit to find those mismatches when Marvin can beat guys. We've also noticed, at least, that through the first couple of weeks, that Arizona's played a few more man coverage teams, and they haven't necessarily been always winning each of those battles. One of the things, at least here, is with Kyler playing super well this season, taking a look at the average separation of all routes and then how often they have an open man. So the average receiver separation for some of those guys, a good example, at least for that one, would be you take a look at some of the top offenses in the league, which would be like the Saints this year. The Eagles have at least still gotten some guys such as Devonta Smith have been able to get super open. You look at the I believe it was week 3 game that the Eagles played where you had about 100 plus receiving yards for their tight end who was getting open across the middle. Cardinals have the lowest separation from their receivers in the league as far as with overall yards. And they're right up there with the Steelers with Justin Fields. And Kyler hasn't had a lot of those times to throw to the open receivers. So that essentially means that you probably need to look at, in some of these cases, at saying, hey, if our idea was we're going to run the ball and using that play action, the play fakes, we're going to trust our receivers to win some of these outside battles, to be able to maybe line up Marvin the slot, having a Trey McBride being able to be kind of that man beater over the middle, all kind of built around that play action game, because teams are having to stop the Cardinals from running, for 5 yards a pop. So far this year, as far as it goes with the Arizona Cardinals, they've not been rushing for 5 yards a pop this year. They've actually been rushing, I believe, for the year 2024. They have a total of 370 rushing yards on a grand total of, let me double check the statistics here. 432 rushing yards on 83 plays. So when you're looking at 432 divided by 83, this is just doing some quick math on the fly. It's just over 5 or so yards per carry, I think, for how that one lines up. Maybe I'll say that I'm wrong there as far as if they're not running for 5 yards a play or carry. They didn't run for that in the Lions game. They were able to run for that in the Bills game with a good start. But I think when teams have figured out they can take away some of the run and be physical with some of those receivers, I think Arizona is going to have to develop and make some plays that are going to be getting guys open more than just like a rub route or something. It's part of where we've said, hey, like if you need to look at getting Greg Dortch lined up in the slot, move someone around, try to get a linebacker matched up on him in a man-to-man type of an area. That's something that I think that we'll want to see over the next couple of weeks. I think you'd like to be able to see some of that. I think some of this, at least as far as when it comes to with pass game and the players, some of it is that these are still young receivers. We don't have a Zay Jones in there. There's not this veteran receiver. Your best receiver is essentially the guy who week 1 was playing up against the Bills team that locked everything in front of them. And week 2, as soon as they kind of dropped that second safety, shading him at least and not letting him get deep, and they put him in a man coverage, he was just running by Tre'Davious White. I think that what we want to see is some innovation with this offense. And for me, I'm not worried, at least as of yet. You'll call me worried if we still get to say week 8, week 9, we're still seeing the same separation issues. And then in the second half of the season, we don't see that, because one of the things that we do know about Cliff Kingsbury's offense is that he can find ways to get guys open, and that it's about finding where those open receivers are. One of the areas that Gene Daniels has done super well this year is when a guy has been open, he has done the best job, I believe, in the league of hitting them this year, only after Lamar Jackson. That is something that can't continue if the Cardinals are going to be able to walk away as the winners come this game against Washington next week. And there's a huge difference between being 1-3 and being 2-2, Marcos. You've got an opportunity here to be able to get back to 2-2 and then play a beat-up Niners team that you maybe have a better shot at beating at so far from what we've seen than at any point this year. That loss to the Rams team you blew out of the building a week ago. it's not to say that this is a must win for the Cardinals, because everyone likes to say it. Every week is technically a must win. There's only 17 of these. But I think a lot of fans will feel much, much better if you can go out, beat the Commanders, even if you're able to say if it's a close game, just getting the dub, before you go on the road for games against the San Francisco 49ers and the Green Bay Packers. If you're able to then split between those teams and be at 3-3 coming into the Chargers game on national television, I think most fans will probably consider that box checked off and will at least be looking at this team as hopefully living up to the expectations we've had of, you can be able to stay at 500 throughout the season. The schedule gets a lot easier in the second half.
Yeah, just like you mentioned, there is a big difference between the 2-2 and 1-3, and we do not want to be in a 1-3 territory, especially with the way the fan base handles losses and whatnot. It's like, we're black and white. When we win, when we lose, we're like back to like, hey, like nothing's working out. Let's go ahead and just blow it up. When we win, we're like, hey, we're gonna go to the playoffs and we're gonna win the Super Bowl. So we don't want to be in 1-3 situation. Obviously we'll hear rumblings and whatnot. The rumblings is if we lose to a Cliff Kingsbury-led offensive team, it's just going to put in a lot of question marks, and it's going to put us in a state of depression when it comes to like the fan base about the direction that we're going. I don't know if I would go as far as like wanting to go that far down, but we absolutely cannot lose this game. It's just one of those situations where we're going up against a bad defense. We need to get settled on offense again, like we have been. I think we can possibly see a high scoring game somewhere, maybe 60 plus. But yeah, we can't lose this game. We can't.
Yeah, everyone's looking at this saying, hey, Commanders, we'll preview the game later in this week. They did not punt, at least through the last 2 games. They haven't punted really since week 1. They just kept scoring again and again, putting up, I believe it was after they played the Buccaneers in the first week. They played the Giants the second week. They have a chance to start out 3-1, surprisingly, for a lot of people, I think, at least, after their wins in the last 2 weeks. We'll talk a little bit more about that game and the Bengals defense, but I think that's going to be something we'll be looking forward to previewing next week. Marcos, thanks again for always tuning into our listeners. You can follow him at least on his social medias at Pancake Soul. Mine's going to be at Blake Murphy 7. And as always, follow the Red Reboot. Red Bird Reboot. Thank you. I was thinking at least of red, white. I was like, that's the Cardinals colors, at least for the most part. You take care, and you guys, that's it for our Redbird Reboot podcast. We've just finished wrapping up week 3 against the Lions. Our next episode, we're talking Commanders. We've been rebooted. So thanks, guys. It's time for us to log off.
See you guys.